This week in racing, we're going to talk about the latest crappy YouTuber to join the motorsports community. We're also going to talk about IndyCar testing officially at Circuit of the Americas. And we finally have an answer, or at least somewhat of one, about just how much slower a modern IndyCar is compared to a modern F1 car. We're also going to talk about the confirmation of the seat swap between Fernando Alonso and Jimmie Johnson. Of course, those of you who have watched this show have known about this for about a whole month, but there seemed to be some confusion that Alonso would be doing the Daytona 500 or something. That may still happen, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. So first, yes, IndyCar did finally have their first official test at Circuit of the Americas. Drivers included were Tony Kanaan for AJ Foyt Racing, Alexander Rossi for Andretti Autosport, and R.C. Anderson for Carlin Racing, among others. Now, there are a few reports out there that suggest that Indy cars are somewhere in the neighborhood between 10 to 15 seconds off the pace of Formula One, and that's something that a lot of people have wanted to know ever since IndyCar announced that they were going to Circuit of the Americas, which of course is a modern Formula One track, and there really hasn't been a direct comparison between IndyCar style cars, champ cars if you will, and Formula One since I think it was around 2006 when both champ car and Formula One raced at Montreal. So what does this say? Well, it doesn't say a whole lot. Honestly, I think if you expected that the gap was going to be any closer than this, I think you were barking up the wrong tree. What's interesting is, though, back in the day, and we're talking back in the day like end of 2014, Chevrolet actually tested their Aero kit. Of course, remember the very high downforce style of that particular car at Circuit of the Americas, and at the time set lap times that would have put them mid-pack on the F1 grid for that year's United States Grand Prix. Now, it's worth noting that the IndyCar that would have tested at that point with all that downforce would have been significantly faster than the current car that IndyCar uses now, and also the Formula One cars are significantly faster now than they were then. Rule changes along with the current development that we always see in F1 would have contributed to a massive leap forward. And that's really where the comparison between IndyCar and F1, frankly, in terms of performance, doesn't hold a lot of weight anymore. There was a time where maybe you could say, well, you know, Indy cars have more horsepower, you know, they're turbocharged, they got V8s, and you've got the F1 cars, they're V10, they're normally aspirated, they weigh less, Indy cars weigh more, and all this stuff. But ultimately, IndyCar has gone down a development path that's completely different to F1. There is really no development of any significance anymore in IndyCar racing. The really only place you can invest development-wise as a team is to develop your shocks and your dampers and whatnot. And of course, F1, you build the entire car. You build virtually the entire chassis. Now, there's some talk about Ferrari maybe sending some parts to Haas and sending some parts to Alfa Romeo Sauber. But on the whole, you build your own chassis, you buy an engine from one of the 3 or 4 suppliers in F1, and that's how you get going versus the very limited options in IndyCar racing. So the actual lap times aren't that important, but people seem to find them very important, so we'll report them here. My opinion really hasn't changed on the Circuit of the Americas for IndyCar. I think the drivers were very positive on it. But personally, I think it's going to be a track limits nightmare. I think we're going to hear, unless race control really cracks down, we're going to hear a lot about that. I'm not convinced it's going to be a particularly entertaining race either, from the perspective of how long the circuit is and how kind of, I guess slow would be, in some sections, would be the word to describe it. I think it's going to be a lot of stop-start. I don't think it's necessarily going to be the greatest. However, I think if Firestone takes a lesson from Pirelli and gives us a nice wide tire gap between the soft and the hard compound tires, I think we could have a really interesting race. But it'll have to probably come down to what compounds or how aggressive Firestone decides to be going forward. And yes, we had confirmation of Fernando Alonso and Jimmie Johnson that they will indeed do a seat swap. It's been rumored forever. It's been teased by both Fernando Alonso and Jimmie Johnson via a viral marketing campaign. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of people were speculating that this was something that it wasn't. And it turned out, yes, it was just a seat swap. But what's interesting is they're doing this seat swap at the Bahrain circuit, which is fairly interesting because it's strange to me that McLaren, Alonso would want to bring their cars there, and especially they're going to ship a NASCAR over to Bahrain. That's a bit strange because, again, Bahrain hosted a Formula One race very early in the season. Alonso obviously is not coming back to Formula One next year. So what is the purpose of doing this? Perhaps it's the only way they could get F1 to agree to this is say, well, you can bring a driver, a car, and a track, or a driver and a car to a track that we are not going to see this particular combination next year. Maybe that's how they got around some of the testing regulations. I personally thought this was going to happen at Circuit of the Americas. It would have made more sense to have it at Circuit of the Americas, or maybe even Mexico City, because you wouldn't have had to fly a stock car out in the middle of a desert. But who knows? It would have probably been easier just to put the Hendrick Motorsports 48 on a tractor trailer, and ship it down to, or drive it down to Austin, Texas, or Mexico City. But regardless, it's going to take place in Bahrain. I don't think we have an official date yet, but this will presumably happen sometime during the winter. I guess the real question now is going to be whether or not Fernando Alonso does anything past this in NASCAR. I don't think it's going to happen this season. I know a lot of people are speculating. There's some rumors out there that he'll do this year's Daytona 500, but ultimately, he's going to need some experience in a stock car that isn't on Bahrain's road course. I think he's going to have to figure out how to drive the car on an oval track, and with the limited amount of testing that NASCAR allows, it's going to be difficult for him to get what I consider the level of experience he even had at Indianapolis when he tried with very little experience or no experience on oval tracks. To come in and do that for NASCAR is going to be a completely different challenge, and I hope the people surrounding him and Alonso himself realize that if he's going to challenge himself by doing this, he's going to have to do it right. He might have to run an ARCA race, as amazing as that combination potentially sounds. I don't know. We'll have to see how this all works out. There's a lot of irons in the fire, but certainly we've seen when a NASCAR driver or an F1 driver gets a taste of a stock car, Juan Pablo Montoya, for example, sometimes they end up actually giving it a shot. So there's no, it isn't like this won't happen. But at least for next year, I don't see Fernando, especially trying the Daytona 500, at least for next year. But then again, I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I'm booking my plane tickets. And finally, our top story. Oh, you guys love me talking about Formula E, and we get to talk about that because Formula E announced this week that they will stream their races on YouTube, and it will be hosted by YouTube sensation KSI. Now, this is interesting because a lot of my audience probably isn't particularly up to date on KSI. In fact, I myself wasn't really that educated on what he does, particularly on YouTube, prior to having to look all this stuff up. I had only heard about him kind of in a cursory kind of, oh yeah, this drama is happening and it involves this KSI character. So who exactly is KSI? Well, I'm going to try to give you a real quick profile of him. So KSI is a YouTuber, very famous, 20 million subscribers, I believe, and he got a lot of those by jumping up and down and screaming about microtransactions. Oh, shit! But in more recent times, he's fancied himself a bit of a rapper. Lamborghini, Lamborghini, bitch, I know you see me in my Lamborghini, Lamborghini. And just for the record, that Lamborghini song is the only evidence I can find at all of KSI having any particular interest in automobiles, or even racing. There's literally no mention on his channel of car racing outside of his Lamborghini. And oh yeah, he also once boxed some douche from Ohio. But yeah, I think a lot of people are wanting me to rant and rave about this, but frankly, I mean, I think in a lot of ways this is a good move from Formula E, and actually I think in a lot of ways this is the kind of stuff that more motorsports should be trying. Maybe not particularly this, but I look at this and I look at Formula E and I say, what are they trying to accomplish? And this is one of the things that is tough for me because as a motorsports commentator, somebody who wants to talk about motorsports, I have a hard time talking about Formula E because in a lot of ways it annoys me and at the same time intrigues me. And I've come to the conclusion, with the help of some other people who've kind of talked to me about it on Twitter, is that Formula E, I don't think is for me. I don't think it's for you, or at least that's what they're trying to do. It's not for you, the motorsports fan. Let's talk about the hierarchy of what Formula E or who Formula E is trying to be for. Number one, you've got the cities, the very large metropolitan cities with a lot of money that you can go as the FIA to, let's say, Berlin or let's say Saudi Arabia. You can go to these people and you can say, hey, have you ever wanted to have a Formula One race, the Formula One atmosphere in the middle of your city, but none of the emissions and none of the noise? And the city leaders, let's just say, let's say, Angela Merkel or somebody is sitting there going, I think that sounds great. All of the economic benefits of a Grand Prix without the bad publicity of noise pollution or other pollution in general. Here's $50 million for your race. And then they put it on. Some cities have enjoyed this. Some cities have not, as we've seen through the kind of fluidity of the Formula E schedule. But I can't blame them for finding a way to make a ton of money this way in motorsports. It's difficult to do. So regardless of how you feel about it, and certainly I feel not that great about it, I'm going to give them the pat on the back for that. Number two person they're looking out for, or the entity they're looking out for, is the manufacturers. They provide, again, the manufacturers a place, yes, to develop new technologies. Now, is there enough technology developed in Formula E, at least up to the standards that I believe there should be? No, I think they should certainly allow battery development. The fact that they have spec batteries almost defeats the purpose of the series entirely, but there are some software engineering things, and particularly the engineering of how these power plants work inside the cars that are valuable for research and development of these manufacturers. There's also the political concern to think about. Many countries are going to eventually end up banning petrol-engine cars within their city centers. So you look at particularly car manufacturers from Germany and car manufacturers from France, which are at some point, I believe in Berlin and Paris, they're going to eventually, again, ban petrol-engine cars. That is a great benefit to these manufacturers. They want to obviously look like to their citizens, to their constituents, and to the politicians they lobby that they are being, I guess, progressive enough in their feelings that, hey, look, we're forget about that Dieselgate thing. Look, all of our Volkswagen brands, Porsche and Audi. Remember when we were racing in that devil petrol engine racing series, WEC? Yeah, we're not there anymore. So, call off the dogs, EPA. But and then third, Formula E is about the racing fan, or not the racing fan. Let me explain really quickly. The racing fan that Formula E is after, I don't believe exists. They want a completely new style of racing fan. For one reason or another, somebody in Formula E has decided that the modern or the traditionalist racing fan is, I guess, not a sustainable business model. And they may or may not be right on that. I haven't really been able to make up my mind. But regardless, they've made up theirs, and they think that if they go to these cities, another reason why they go to the cities, by the way, they can attract a new, young crop of fans that are interested in their product. It's why you see some of the most reprehensible gimmicks of all time associated with Formula E. In fact, I think there was an article that came out probably about 5 or 6 months ago that said the organizers were looking at changing fan boost, which is the worst gimmick of all time, by the way, in racing, period. They're changing it to some sort of Mario Kart style thing where drivers can attack their opponent. I'm not joking. Look it up. Can attack their opponents through their steering wheel, and they have power-ups or something that they can use throughout the race. Really. So, obviously, they've got an idea here. They think they're going to attract this brand new section of people, and KSI is a way to kind of tap into that. Now, I think this is a decent idea. Remember, this guy has 20 million subscribers. That's theoretically 20 million new fans of Formula E. Now, depending on what they're paying him, obviously, there may be a crossover of where you're paying the guy too much for the potential influence he's having. Will this have a positive influence? It may. It may. There's no doubt about it. It depends how interested KSI is in the product itself. I think if KSI really suddenly gets the itch, the bug, he really gets passionate about motorsports and Formula E in particular, he may end up starting to do quite a bit of videos and vlogs, and probably will actually is contractually obligated to make vlogs about the time he is commentating these races. But I just don't see the people who are interested in Logan Paul versus KSI boxing. Are they really going to transfer over to Formula E? And in other ways, or in other respects, how do you think, or I guess the question is, would a KSI viewer who may be curious about Formula E and this broadcast on YouTube, which, by the way, I'm not even sure is going to be available in the United States. A lot of times when they do live broadcasts, I honestly try to watch Formula E, but with the TV contracts they have, a lot of times when they stream on YouTube, it's not available in the United States. So this may be all bupkis to 99% of my audience, but regardless, I'll tell you about it anyway. A viewer who comes in for KSI, are they going to be intrigued by the Formula E product, or are they going to care about the Formula E product, or are they just going to care about the fact that KSI is talking about it? And here's the other problem, is that he's not the only YouTuber that's going to be in the broadcast booth. They've also got this Lawrence McKenna guy. And this Lawrence McKenna guy, you probably have not heard of him. I certainly hadn't. And certainly the headlines who have been writing these articles about KSI haven't heard about this Lawrence McKenna guy. It's because he's a soccer reporter, or European football for those of you outside the States. He doesn't have a motorsports background. I looked into it. There's not any kind of real talking points for him either in terms of a background here. And that's kind of the problem, which is, okay, you've got this big star KSI that you've brought in here. But the problem is, if you have KSI and this Lawrence McKenna guy in the booth, neither of those guys are going to be able to describe accurately what's happening in the race. And that's, I think this is the great flaw of this. I think if you brought KSI in to be the play-by-play guy, or maybe the color commentator guy, to come in and kind of, bring that star power, bring a fresh idea, or a fresh look at racing, particularly Formula E racing, I think that could work. But you need somebody in there who is going to be able to explain, get excited about, and inform your star KSI what to look for, what to get excited about. And this is the problem. I suspect the first broadcast that they do with these guys, which is, remember, going to be in Saudi Arabia, that's the opening round of the championship, I think these two guys are going to not have a clue what they're talking about. It's going to be a bit of a farce, and I think they're going to send a guy like Dario Franchitti up there to talk and explain to these guys exactly what's going on, because I think these guys are going to have a hard time actually articulating what's going on without just kind of, I'm a little bit worried that maybe it's going to turn into a bit of a joke, maybe a bit of a meme, and maybe that's what Formula E is going for. Maybe they want all of this stuff to be memed. Maybe they're going to have a face cam. This is what maybe might happen, is they might have a face cam there the whole time, almost like a Let's Play, and just watch KSI kind of going and reacting to all of this stuff, and then hoping that creates some sort of a meme that goes viral, and then Formula E is all over the place. Now, some people have said and gotten pretty angry about this, saying, well, you're screwing over the motorsports YouTubers. And look, I get it, but I also see why they went this direction, and I hope I've explained that a little bit better. And before you get too upset and say, well, they're screwing over the motorsports YouTubers, I would say no, they're not. I think, you do have to get to a certain level, but if you look at where true motorsports YouTubers have gone when they get an opportunity, look at Jimmie Broadbent. He got 100,000 subscribers and is now commentating esports for Gran Turismo. You certainly would think that, Gran Turismo is certainly a company that knows the kind of people to put in that kind of position, and they chose Jimmie Broadbent because he is a motorsports YouTuber. And just look no further than Matty G and what happened when he gave that guy a budget and what he did and kind of made WTF1 this huge multimedia racing platform easily in terms of a racing platform aimed at young people. WTF1 is the biggest, bar none. And again, that has a lot to do with the fact that somebody over there thought, hey, we're going to bring this YouTuber guy in and we're going to hire him and we're going to say, look, we're going to give you a budget now. Go crazy. Look what happened. So what are your thoughts? What do you think about KSI commentating Formula E? What do you think about IndyCar at COTA? What do you think about the Jimmie Johnson, Fernando Alonso seat swap? A lot of stuff to talk about. I hope you found it interesting. If you did, if you're somebody who's come over here because you saw KSI in the title and you got to this point, hey, maybe you're going to be a fan of Formula E because you're going to tune in and actually probably enjoy it. But let me know down in the comments section below. Be sure to subscribe for more motorsport content, and we'll see you in the next video.